So thank you, Dr. Kahn, for joining me here. And I really appreciate you being here. And I would love if you could just get started by telling us a bit about your background in medicine and how you got started.
Sure, and thank you. It's a pleasure. And I know we're going to be hanging out together at a conference soon, which will be a ton of fun.
Yeah.
But I grew up in suburban Detroit, which is where I am standing right now, and got into medical school early in Ann Arbor, University of Michigan. They had one of these compressed programs right out of high school. You were accepted into a 6-year program. Kind of knew I wanted to be a heart doctor. I had a little murmur as a kid. It kind of fascinated me. It was no big deal, but I was always around equipment and tests. And that actually, two things happened the first day. I got into med school at age 18, and I adopted a plant-based diet at age 18 because the cafeteria at my dorm was so disgusting that I didn't have any ethical issues. I didn't have any environmental issues. I had survival genes that told me go to the salad bar. And it's 40 years later, and I still eat plant-based. And as I got deeper into medicine and hang out with cool people in San Diego and LA that care passionately about animals and environment and the whole explosion of the plant-based food industry, and it's become a core of what I do in practice. Plus, I own a restaurant and this and that. But I went on to train in cardiology in Dallas, Texas. Kansas City, I learned how to put balloons and stents in any artery in your body. And 1990, I came back to Michigan to start practicing. And 3 weeks after I put my shingle up with some other docs, Dean Ornish published his kind of seminal paper called The Lifestyle Heart Trial, showing that a combination of lifestyle features of exercise, social support, mind-body practices like yoga, and a strong plant-based diet, he documented could reverse atherosclerosis. And whoa, I've been eating this way because it was my survival response, but there's actually nobody knew. There were little suggestions going back decades. Nobody knew that it might be possible to reverse decades of atherosclerosis with lifestyle.
Yeah, that's cool that you were doing it even before Ornish published his stuff.
So I think I'm the only cardiologist in Southeast Michigan that read that paper, and it was in Lancet. I mean, it's a premier medical journal. I said, wow, this is pretty cool. I'm doing this, and so I'll teach some other people what I do. And so pretty much since then, I've been in the cath lab. I treat heart attacks. I put in stents. But I'll talk to you more about your radicchio salad while you're under my care. I find when I'm putting needles in people, they pay attention to lifestyle recommendations a lot more than in other settings. So I have a really preventive integrative cardiology practice, rather unique, using advanced testing on carotids and arteries, and use a lot of supplements and lifestyle. Write books, do blogs, and gotta have fun. But I do have a restaurant in town with my son and a food truck and a food dispensary. So we're kind of moving to this growing world of health awareness, and I think we hit rock bottom, so it's all up from here.
Cool. So, for people who are not necessarily aware of kind of what a traditional cardiologist might do, could you maybe elaborate a bit on kind of what traditional cardiologists do and what you're doing differently, or what you have been doing differently?
The person you'll rarely see is the person I mainly see. People come to my clinic and I say, so why are you here? And they say, I have nothing wrong with me, but heart disease is everywhere. Check me out. Because there is not built into medicine the same early detection philosophy that exists for breast cancer and mammograms, colon cancer, colonoscopy, and stool samples. It just doesn't exist. And there is the ability between blood work and some direct testing that's become very inexpensive and very accessible. Anybody age 40 over, and a few people under 40 if they're really high risk, family or diabetic or crazy cholesterol, if they want to know if they're aging on track or aging inappropriately and aggressively, the answer's at a hand. And for a few $100s, everybody can find out. But it's not built in, and it's not on billboards, and hospitals don't promote it generally. So usually a cardiologist will see somebody, could be high blood pressure, could be high cholesterol. It's usually I had a stress test my primary doctor ordered and it wasn't right. I have palpitations or shortness of breath. Usually if they really have heart disease, because some of that's anxiety and other issues. But you're picking them up at the end of the road if that proves to be heart disease. And it's a bad model. I mean, you're picking people up after 5-10 years of progressive silent problem. Dr. Dean Ornish isn't the only one. I mentioned his name twice now. There was a physician in the 40s and 50s, Dennis Burkitt, English physician that lived in Africa most of his career, and there's something called Burkitt's lymphoma named after him. he used the analogy that the sink faucet's on and overflowing. The medical system's great at mopping up the floor, which is like patients showing up in the emergency room at the end stages. Nobody thinks of turning off the faucet, which might be dealing with people's lifestyle and early detection. And that analogy still holds, unfortunately, with all the advancements in medical practice. Something like under 5% of all dollars in the world on healthcare are on prevention, and 95%.
Wow.
You know,
That's insane.
You've fallen off the waterfall, and doctors are operating, stenting, bypass, lifelong 8 prescriptions, and all that stuff can have its place. I'm not a total anti-medicine basher. I'm still in that system. I'm a professor at a university, but it's just logical. Let's go upstream and try and identify the lifestyle, the genetics, the inflammation, and correct all that, as well as actually characterize if you already have the problem or not. Because it's a silent disease. Heart disease, most people find out the day they have their heart attack or die if they've had a problem for 5 to 10 years, and it was missed because the system doesn't teach us to pick it up. One of the greatest quotes I've ever heard, and it's very provocative, is a heart attack after age 80 is God's will. A heart attack before age 80 is a failure of the medical system. Really provocative, but that was actually 1955. That was Dwight Eisenhower's cardiologist, who already had the sense we should be able to identify people who are on their path to a heart attack. We were just figuring out smoking, cholesterol, blood sugar, that this wasn't just aging. It was, at least to a large degree, lifestyle related. So yeah, it's a failure of the medical system, so it pisses me off. Families suffer, patients suffer, businesses suffer when their executives die, and it could be cut short. And it's not like you have to spend $100,000. It's accessible. It's just nobody's teaching it, with some exception.
Yeah. So how long have you been in practice prior to this?
You know, med school, graduated in '83, so in some sense, you know, that's 34 years, but fully out 27 years, 1990.
Wow.
And, I have a vibrant practice. You're a high energy guy. I do about 8 things a day, a lot of energy. I attribute some of that to passion and love for what I'm doing, some of that to a very clean diet and some mind-body yoga and infrared sauna and a good relationship with a marriage of 36 years that, you know, provides stability and love and support, and some great rescue dogs. All the other things, I do grounding and earthing. I mean, anything that will energize my body and give me some great electron flow, I'm all for.
Beautiful. Now, I know from some conversations that we've had outside of this interview that something was missing in your practice. Now, what was that? What was missing in your practice?
Yeah, you know, doctors take a history, do a physical, look at some lab data, EKGs. We have prescription drugs, which I use far less than most cardiologists, but there's a time and a need, and bypass and stents. That's really the menu for standard cardiology. I had added in mind-body, advanced lab work, some supplements that are appropriate at times, CoQ10 and others. There's an unlimited number that could help certain people, personalized medicine. Well, I personally didn't have, and when it came to nutrition and diet, I would ask people to explore the world of plant-based life, whether it's 50, 80, 90, or 100% of the way they select their food. Watch Forks Over Knives, read a book by Dr. Esselstyn or Ornish, something, and many of them would just get it. You know, they knew they had to clean up their diet. I didn't have a weight program. I didn't have a really powerful anti-inflammatory program. And a program, you know, I don't have a name program. I don't need to name the ones that people pay. I'll just shout out Nutri-System, Marie Osmond. I mean, you turn on the TV, you can't help but see the ads. And that's not something, when I've ever studied the ingredients, I'd ever have in my practice, because it's chemical warfare. Sorry, Marie, I love you. I like your brother a little better, but anyways, Donnie's for you. But anyways, I didn't have that kind of program, and I really wasn't looking for it, but it sort of fell in my lap about 6 months ago, and it all leads to better health and energy. So to answer your question, I didn't have that kind of scientifically based weight management that might merge with my main interest, which was longevity, hacking, you know, your body and your genetics and your metabolism to, you know, have the best life and the most energetic life.
So what shifted for you? What did you become aware of that kind of made things shift, and how did you change your practice at that point?
Sure. Yeah. So over the last 4 or 5 years, my clinic is called the Kahn Center for Cardiac Longevity. It's a little bit of a bold name. What are you doing that? But, you know, because of that and my interests, I've been reading the research. There's a Dr. Aubrey de Grey's some people may know, a PhD with the best beard in all of science.
He does.
There's a guy in New York, Dr. Nir Bazali, who's a professor of aging. But really, the coolest dude on the street is a professor at USC in Los Angeles, Dr. Walter Longo. V for Walter. He's an Italian from Genoa, still quite young. He's under 50. And I just have seen his name and read his papers, very heavy science for 20 years. In fact, he's credited some of the most essential pathways that are described that are resulting in aging of cells in models like yeast and mice and humans. He described their very pathways. If anybody's heard of the mTOR pathway or rapamycin inhibiting the mTOR pathway, that, you know, there was no mTOR pathway. Dr. Longo described that and showed how that accelerated activity of mTOR may lead to cell death and aging. So, you know, what wasn't known to me till January when I was listening to answer your question, I was listening to a podcast and he was being interviewed, and he started talking about his, you know, more than decade-long interest in fasting as a tool to reverse the pathways he had identified originally that promote aging. He was looking for a natural, non-pharmacologic way to interrupt those aging pathways. And I did not realize his mentor 22 years ago was one of the docs in the Biosphere 2, where they locked themselves up. And although I don't know that they planned to fast, they had so little food and they came out, you know, anorectic, that they actually had one of the best experiences in fasting, or best or most scientifically studied actual human experiences in fasting. And
I didn't know.
Interested, and then he kind of walked away from fasting research to concentrate on this basic molecular biology. But about a decade ago, brought his early interest in fasting back to ask the question, can you create an ideal, he calls it Nutri-Technology, you know, using nutrition as a technology to interrupt these pathways to promote healing, regeneration, rejuvenation, high energy, and maybe extend life. So he was playing around and found he could make yeast live 10 times longer by changing the chow, or whatever you feed yeast. He could make mice live nearly twice as long by changing the constituents of what they fed them. No drug, no gene therapy, no CRISPR-9, nothing, just food. And then he took a leap of faith to say, maybe these pathways are human pathways and we'll respond to. And lo and behold, in the last 3-4 years, a flurry of publications that show you can create a diet that, and in fact, one of his leading principles is that extreme stress is not where he wanted to be. Water fasting, which some people find extremely useful, and there's clinics and a whole kind of philosophy of using water-only fasting for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, medically supervised. There's probably 4, 5, 6 dozen doctors around the country certified in that. Probably most famous place is True North Clinic in Santa Rosa, California, Dr. Alan Goldhammer. But, you know, Longo's philosophy is too stressful, not appropriate for the elderly, not appropriate for the frail. It's just not a big fan. Your white cells go down as you fast. He was worried about what long-term water fasting does to immune function. That was his perspective. So he was looking at a way, and he created a menu that gave the biochemical and metabolic benefits of complete fasting, yet you could eat a sizable amount of calories. So it's called a fasting-mimicking diet. Get the benefits, get the weight, get the fat loss, get the inflammatory benefits, yet you can function, you can eat, you don't need medical supervision. And lo and behold, it was already a business that USC had incorporated and launched as kind of a startup. And I jumped in. I said, you know, I got to get this, I got to do this. So I've been using this. It's basically 5 days a month of a prescribed menu that actually comes in a box. And the other 25 days a month, do what you want, which, again, Longo's philosophy was doing something 2 days a week or every other day. It means your whole life is dominated by this focus on a specific fasting, where here you can do 5 days dedicated to your health, longevity, rejuvenation, and then 25 days, eat whatever you define as healthy. It'd probably be a good idea not to go to Burger King every day if you really focus on longevity. Maybe one day we'll see a little better menu there, but it's not so awesome right now. And it's become very easy. It's like the easiest thing I've ever done. I've seen some phenomenal results personally in energy, vitality, vibrancy. But I have now several hundred patients that will, attest, and many thousands that have been enjoying this, plus a whole bunch of interesting branches where fasting mimicking diets are taking off for other disease conditions and just well-being.
Cool. So I would love to get a little deeper as far as your experience with it and the results that you've been seeing in your clinic. But I'm actually really curious on the mechanisms of how it's possible to still eat, but still kind of create this fasting physiology and get a lot of the benefits of that physiology. My understanding, and I know there's some debate among various researchers on this. Some people are really, really strict and say, if you consume anything other than water, you're disrupting fasting physiology. Other people are a little looser. I would say I'm a little looser as far as saying, maybe certain things like herbs or greens or, squeezing some lime into water is not going to disrupt fasting physiology to a significant degree. But this is kind of another step beyond even something that I had considered, which is that it's possible to consume a pretty significant amount of food and a pretty sizable variety of different foods and yet still get the benefits of fasting. So how does that work?
Yeah, so it was a decade-long experience of testing, and very frankly, I know there hasn't been any human experiment. Take a group of humans and do a 5-day complete water fast, take a group and do a 5-day fasting mimicking diet, and see. It may be that you're getting 60 to 70% of the benefit versus a water fast. It may not be. I don't think that's actually been tested. I think it was more, he thought that was off the table as something not very practical. You can't sell a box of nothing to a person and call it a startup from USC. That'd be a great idea. The fasting box, you open it and it's empty.
The overhead is low.
So I think part of it, and I'm jumping into, water that I'm familiar with, but, probably not the world's expert on. But part of it is the macronutrient mix. So, certain high protein diets tend to activate the mTOR pathway. High protein diets tend to activate what's called the RAS PKA pathway, another pathway Dr. Longo described. And it's particularly 2 amino acids, methionine and leucine, which some people are using in sports supplements, branched-chain amino acid supplements, and it's naturally going to be in many animal products, meat products. So this is a very low protein mix. It's actually also, it's very low. There's no added sugar, very low added sugar. Just everybody would agree that's where we need to be, but it's a relatively low carbohydrate, solely complex carbohydrate. But it is actually a surprisingly high natural fat content, 60, 70, maybe plus % of calories from olives, whole nuts, particularly. There's no oils. It's soup mixes, it's bars, nut bars. It's actually bags with 5 or 6 green olives from southern Spain. So it actually, you will get ketotic if you measure it the 3rd, 4th, 5th day from eating 800, 900 calories a day. But it's a plant-based play, because it is plant-based. It's a plant-based play that may mimic a bit the physiology of a low-carb diet that most people are going to be doing with animal products. Some data that if you're going to do that, plant-based may be a better play. There's been some studies out there for a while called Eco Atkins from a researcher in Toronto, David Jenkins, that talk about the metabolic benefits of a plant-based ketosis, and plenty of other data that there is a difference between animal protein and plant protein, but it's low protein overall. So some of it is that. Some of it is the specific ingredients, that it's a Mediterranean style diet. But for example, there's many teas, but there's only hibiscus, spearmint, and lemon. And there's quite a bit of data, the antioxidant power of hibiscus being unique over other teas. It's in fact, it's even higher antioxidant level than green tea. There is no green tea in this. Spearmint, there's some data about its antioxidant power and cognitive boosting ability. It's not unique to this program that spearmint's included. And why spearmint and why isn't there matcha? Because, he had played with these and in animals found differences. So, I mean, that's, there's quite a bit of spice, a lot of data on ginger and turmeric and such activating anti-inflammatory pathways. But, it could have been a bust. And when the human study was done, it could have not mimicked what was found in yeast and mice. But indeed, it did quite closely, in fact. And we can talk about those results that I've tested myself. Plus, more importantly, there's a randomized study that was published in February this year in a premier peer-reviewed journal that's pretty definitive on what you might expect as results.
Yeah, please. So to tell us a bit about what those results were and what your
Yeah.
clinical
Well,
experience
I'll
was.
start with me first, just briefly. And, N-1 doesn't mean much if there weren't science behind it. But I've been plant-based vegan for 40 years. I always carried a few extra pounds. I was a chubby kid. I wore a husky bar mitzvah suit. I think I've learned in the last 5 months, if you view excellent food as a source of nutrients, you might want to overeat them because, yeah, there's more fiber, more magnesium, or, more quercetin in my onions, and too much. Plus, there's kind of this philosophy in the plant-based movement, it's not about restriction, it's about abundance. Well, we all know there's some chubby vegans, and they're not all eating chick nuggets. Some of them are just eating real quality whole food plant-based and maybe just overeating. So I've lost 22 pounds in 5 months, and it was without an effort. I'm just telling you. I call myself the FMD whisperer. I just talk about this stuff, and I think I lose a pound. But it's interesting because it's really not, and nobody's probably going to lose 100 pounds even if you did it over and over. That's unknown. Is this a program for a 350-pound person that wants to do it every 4 weeks? Not tested. When I talk to the team that put this together, they say probably not going to happen. But I think for many people, the 10, 15, 18-pound weight loss is very, very doable. And I've had patients lose 10 pounds in 5 days. And I don't think it's water weight. It's really, so that's one. And lots of energy, great sleep. Whether my skin is more glowing or not, I don't know. People tell me that. They have data that that's actually a reasonable expectation. It's a gluten-free menu too for those that care about that, and a lot of people care about that. I've seen my LDL drop, my C-reactive protein was already low, but it dropped. I didn't measure, but we'll talk about the published data. The last thing is, I'll tell you about now. They have data, and why is this different than the fast diet in England, the 5-2 diet, or once a week? So Dr. Longo's data is, if you will restrict calories and become slightly ketotic in the calorie mix that he's created, on the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th day in a row, you're getting some responses you don't get twice a week or once a week, including a drop in IGF-1, a tumor marker often associated with breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer. IGF-1 drops, and I documented that on myself. I was low, but it dropped more after 3 cycles, 3 months. And stem cells, so white count tends to fall during the fast, but the 6th day, 5 days on, the 6th day you're supposed to slowly refeed with some soups and some juices and kind of soft foods for the 6th day. Refeeding is important, but they're actually, your white cells starts to go back up, and when you do the proper analysis, I haven't done it on myself, but published studies, it's a population of very young white cells, including some stem cells showing up in your bloodstream, that have the potential to go to places of injury and heal, repair, rejuvenate injured tissue. So personally, I had a terrible plantar fasciitis that just would not go away. 2 months gone. Left shoulder pain, I don't know what that was from, it's gone. These sound kind of religious, and so, move away from my personal experience. The published data is blood pressure, and my blood pressure dropped 20 systolic, and I was sort of struggling at age 58 and a half. I'm going to have to sneak in a little Ramipril and not tell anybody I'm on a prescription drug, because right now I'm drug-free. So my systolic pressure has dropped 20 points with food. I mean, pretty remarkable. I really didn't think that was going to happen. The published data in 100 patients randomized to their standard diet or this 5-day program once a month for 3 months is C-reactive protein, blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar. Probably more importantly, total body weight down, visceral fat down, lean body mass not down. In fact, lean body mass went up a little bit in these studies measured by DEXA scan and other things. And then IGF-1 down, and stem cell production up for a few days on refeeding and afterwards. With generally a report of increased vitality, increased energy, good sleep. You're not really hangry because 800 to 1,000 calories a day is enough. Maybe, you're probably not going to want to do your workout that day, or a light walking or a light treadmill walking workout, but lots of energy, lots of ability to function. Unlike a water fast where you're probably going to really want to have 5 days where you're nearly non-functioning, at least for most people, not superhumans like you, who probably do a 5-day water fast and still go do a good workout. There is some ancillary data that's fascinating. There's some animal studies where models of multiple sclerosis have shown that actually with a slightly lower version of this program, but the same calorie mix, low protein, no added sugar, complex carb, relatively low, high healthy fats, that they're actually documenting regrowth of myelin sheath on exons and decreased symptoms. In a human trial that so far has only shown improved symptoms of multiple sclerosis. They haven't done nerve biopsies to match what was seen in animals. There's animal studies in a human trial on cognitive function, executive function, BDNP production, all favoring improved cognitive function after 3 cycles of this. And maybe one of the coolest differentials is there have been studies, both basic and now human, that that there's a differential response to cancer cells and normal cells to this plant-based ketotic fasting mimicking diet. And cancer cells actually seem to change their physiology to be more sensitive to chemotherapy. And there's a higher kill of cancer cells and a lower kill of healthy natural cells. You'd like to actually kind of separate the populations based on their response to the stress of fasting and the ketosis. So there's a 4-day program. If you're getting chemo for breast cancer and you eat this program during that, you may get less side effect and more response. And that there actually are products being developed called chemo leave, I think it's called, for chemo and MS and brain diseases. So a really exploding field of this Nutri-Technology, and flipping a metabolic switch using ketosis, but limiting it so the risk. Who shouldn't do it? Underweight people shouldn't do it. Type 1 diabetics, be very concerned. Type 2 have to work with their physician or be very knowledgeable. Probably shouldn't take their medicines because blood sugar drops and they may get quite symptomatic by lowering their diet and developing some ketosis. So we got to be very, very careful in those. But my advanced heart failure patients, I mean, I'm gonna it is still a stress. They are going to get a little ketotic and may not be right for them.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of my big areas of interest and a huge focus of my work is concept of hormesis.
Yeah, this is all a hormetic play.
Right. Yeah, and for those that don't know, this is the concept of a temporary metabolic stress, basically inducing adaptations in the organism that actually confer benefits. So increased resilience to stress, and that can translate on the cellular level to things like an increase in the cellular antioxidant and anti-inflammatory defense systems, increase in mitochondrial size and power, and a number of other different potential types of benefits depending on the specific type of stress. But one of the things that seems to be interesting, and that even I don't really understand that well as someone who's really delved into the hormesis research really deeply, is this idea that hormesis mechanisms seem to kind of induce this response in the body where it almost relearns how to heal. And I was discussing with this researcher here in San Diego at UCSD, this lab for mitochondrial medicine. He does a lot of research on mitochondria, obviously, but some relating to hormesis. And one of the things he talks about is this kind of idea of you're teaching the body or reteaching the body how to heal itself again. Yeah. And through this temporary stress. And as I'm listening to you describe some of the mechanisms that they've identified with this fasting, as far as you get this temporary drop in blood cell count, and then you sort of revive the white blood cells, they're younger, and then you get stem cells floating around. And it's an interesting phenomenon, right? That by inducing this temporary stress, the body kind of regenerates and kind of heals itself.
Absolutely. It's fascinating. I mean, when we exercise, as you know, some people will talk about that being injury and repair, and you ultimately end up stronger at the end of the road if you don't hurt yourself by regular exercise. And whether it's cryotherapy, there's a lot of different things we all do to induce our hormetic response. I think this food program is a mild to moderate stress, purposely designed not to be extreme. But what's really interesting is the universality of it, that actually the responses are very similar in a single cell organism called the yeast, to a small mammal called the mouse, to the complex human beings that we are. And they are primitive, but we are adapted to undergo periods of deprivation, starvation, and activate these pathways of protection. And we don't in our current society because we overeat and we under-exercise, and bringing them back in. I think this is like the real caveman play.
Yeah.
whether you're a complete fast or use this now scientifically, studied fasting mimicking diet. We really are bringing out those primitive reflexes that are, universal. Very cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an interesting.
Imagine if you can regrow myelin sheaths in MS,
Yeah.
which again, that's a mouse model with some supportive data from human symptom response. It's going to be verified by MRI and other mechanisms. But God, that's like real restorative.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's quite a paradigm shift for people to wrap their head around this. I mean, first, the idea that doing something which is stressful, quote unquote,
Right.
given how much negative stigma we associate with the word stress, we have to wrap our head around this idea that something that's stressful for our body temporarily is actually conferring health benefits. And then, beyond that, it's just, I mean, it's just kind of an amazing thing that you're doing something that's stressful, that's conferring health benefits, and I mean, it's kind of a remarkable phenomenon.
And I think you and I and 2% of the population have heard the word hormesis, not being pompous about it, but there's a great opportunity to teach, and there's different tools we have to kind of activate those pathways. I'm just I just can't talk about the simplicity of just, the toughest thing for all my patients, finding 5 days, they're not eating out, they're not going out, they're not at the country or wherever they are, and they can dedicate 5 days to eating a prescribed food program.
Right. Yeah. I spaced out there a second ago. I was going to say something and I kind of forgot, but what I was going to say is the first thing is you have to wrap your head around this idea that doing something that's stressful has benefits. And then what you were getting at is that we're biologically adapted to these periods of food scarcity or food absence. And then it kind of, you're creating a paradigm that says the absence of a stress is actually a stress. The absence of a stress is actually a pathological stressor. By always feeding yourself and avoiding this temporary stressor of having food scarcity, you're actually creating a pathological chronic stress on the body. It's kind of a weird flip of things.
And it gets into, many people are aware that it may be a value just to go 12 hours a day without eating, 14 hours a day. We're always breaking down, metabolizing, catabolism. We're not going to ever give our body a chance to repair, which is also counterintuitive. You're telling me, eating a kale salad at 10:30 at night is actually not good for you. It may actually not be optimal that time of night if you're, having to rev up your metabolism, and you're going to eat at 7 in the morning. Yeah, so these are counterintuitive, but they're very powerful, very primitive. Just for those of you watching, I mean, have you ever seen this model, Ari?
Yeah.
This is 5 pounds of visceral fat. I mean, this is the average weight loss you get with 5 days of a fasting mimicking diet. Wow. But some are. I've had people lose 10 to 12. Some lose 2 or 3. But one, it's very heavy, and two, it's just such a powerful little tool that I use to motivate people. And then they succeed, and it's one of the first times they succeeded at flipping the switch that promotes health.
Beautiful. One last question for you. I'm an advocate of various types of intermittent fasting, and I'm kind of, I would say, loose with my recommendations, meaning I don't have one specific intermittent fasting type protocol that I say this is the right way to do it, this is the only way to do it, because I've looked at the evidence as it stands right now, and there just isn't, there isn't a consensus about like, the 5-2 is the best way, or doing a daily 16-hour fasting window, or doing whatever type of variation of fasting, and there's so many different ones that we can talk about. There isn't this consensus that says this is the best way to do it because we've tested them all versus each other. So I'm kind of like, do what works for you. Just incorporate some kind of principle of occasional fasting in whatever way that's sustainable for you. But after listening to you talk about Walter Longo's research and all the experimentation that went into it, I'm wondering if you and if they are pretty convinced that this method, this approach to fasting is the best way of doing it.
Well, I think the answer would be, number one, it's probably the most scientifically supported right now compared to others. There's data, and the Calorie Restriction Society has some published data following, about 50,000 people that dedicate. But it's, again, you can't have 25 days of a sane diet in that kind of program. I mean, the beauty of this is, would you give up 5 days a month of a somewhat restricted menu to have 25 days a month to eat enjoyably but sensibly and have no restriction? I think it's a much more doable program, and it's most scientifically supported. Is this the pinnacle and will never improve upon? Will metformin and fasting mimicking diets and AMP kinase activation even create a bigger? The answer is all these things would have to be studied separately. So I think it's pretty unique right now that it's a non-prescription, non-pharmaceutical food play that has really 20+ years of research behind it. I think it's I don't know how we can do better than that. Now, I will say what's really interesting, last comment I have to offer, what do you do the other 25 days? And I'm not talking vegan, paleo, Mediterranean, put any label there. Do you do intermittent fasting on those 25 days? Do you, eat 8 hours a day and keep 16 not eating? I think there is, I've experienced this strongly, and my patients reported to me. I've not gone 5 days eating 800 calories a day very often. I do Yom Kippur, I don't do any, and I've done a lot of days of 1 day. So, I mean, to be able to go 5 days on relatively less food creates a viewpoint and a freedom and a psychology that, hey, I don't need so much the other 25 days. So many people have started to apply 2 meals a day for the other 25 days, not restricted, not limited, not a specific, calorie and macronutrient combination. But, I know Dr. Longo eats breakfast and dinner and skips lunch routinely as part of his kind of long-term play in between using this program. And Dr. Nir Bazali in New York does lunch and dinner. I mean, a lot of people are limiting that. So I've adopted all that, and there may be exactly a role to use some of those other varying plans, the other 25 days, to maintain the benefit, maintain the weight, because I've been able to keep it off without going back to this program very often.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing all the research around this. And if somebody wants to start doing this, or if somebody wants to learn more about your work or more about this approach to fasting, where should they go?
Yeah, I'm found at my website, drjoelkahn.com, drjoelkahn.com, drjoelkahn.com. And probably the best site, the startup of which, it's not my business, is Prolon, Prolon, fmd.com, FMD for fasting-mimicking diet. Or, frankly, Google Walter Longo. He's been giving a series of talks all over the world, a couple podcasts. Very, very interesting, kind of 20+ year history of how he got to here and how he got clinicians like me to just introduce it in practice as, before you're going to get a blood pressure drug from me, you're going to do this. And people are seeing the same results I did. I mean, that's fairly revolutionary introduction of what we should be doing is optimizing lifestyle before committing to lifelong prescription medication in many cases.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good note to finish on. So thank you so much, Dr. Kahn. It was an absolute pleasure interviewing you. And this is great stuff that I think my audience is going to love. So thank you.
Keep up the energy work.
Yeah. And I look forward to hanging out with you in a couple of days.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Take care, man.